Well, good evening. Welcome to the continuing series of South Florida Hospital News and Mirza Healthcare Law's legal seminars, basically for the physicians of South Florida. Our goal is to educate you on different topics that we believe affects your practice on an everyday type basis. And today's presentation by Ben Mirza, the founder and partner of Mirza Healthcare Law, is going to be about starting a practice or actually continuing a practice or maybe having to change some things in your practice, but basically making sure that your practice is set up correctly and you're operating at the most efficient levels. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and Ben, it's all yours.
Thank you, Charles, for having me. I appreciate it. And I do appreciate everyone attending. It's really nice to be able to present when there's a fair amount of folks. And I'm going to ask that if you guys have questions, just ask along the way because uh, today's seminar is a little different. It's really intended for those who are thinking outside of the box, not for people. It's not really for the employee types. It's for the physicianpreneurs, meaning the physicians who want to be entrepreneurs, or maybe they already are, or they have an entrepreneurial spirit, and that's really what they want to feed. So today's webinar is about that. So let me get started with a slideshow and from the beginning. And let me do share screen, share screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. Um, Hold on. And all right. So today I wanted to put together something that was specifically from a legal perspective of how to start a healthcare practice. Obviously, it doesn't begin and end with legal, but legal is an integral part of how you go about setting up a healthcare practice. So I wanted to give you my insights as to what I found over the years that have worked for people. So I'll be sharing with you stuff that I've learned and that I do, and I'll also be sharing with you the stuff that people do on their own and what you can do on your own as well, so you can actually help yourself. Today's seminar is really going to be about teaching you how to fish rather than giving you the fish. So there are two comments in the chat. All right, good. Okay. Um, so and thanks to South Florida Hospital News, these sorts of seminars are made available to a fairly large population, especially those members of the Broward County Medical Association. By way of background, my name is Ben Mirza. I am not only an attorney, but today I'm going to take a little bit of time to just kind of explain to you my background and how that plays into today, which is I'm an attorney. I used to be a certified public accountant. I have a master's of public health administration where I focused on healthcare strategies. I have another degree in mergers and acquisitions as it relates to corporations and their transactions that they carry out. So, you know, most of the time, most of my colleagues, even in healthcare law, almost all of them are either psychology majors, English majors, history majors. I'd say, I don't mean 51%, I mean like 90% plus are of another discipline of another background. So you'll see that my take on what we do today is really going to be much more nuts and boltsy than it is about uh, 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 I don't know, just a general feel for things. So today we'll hopefully get into the nicer depths of how I can explain to you or help you understand, and maybe you can explain some stuff to me because not a, I for sure don't know everything. By way of background, I've worked for large corporations and small. Um, I've worked for Florida Power and Light, the FPL Group, LeBlanc and Royal Telecom. I've worked for some larger law firms. I've even worked for like American Medical Depot, Broward Health, Health First, Jupiter Medical. I've interned over at Yale New Haven Health in their strategy department. So my background is really from a business legal perspective of healthcare. Um, so today's seminar is called Legal Insights: How to Start Your Own Healthcare Practice, and really, it's for the creative healers in you, those who are no longer really satisfied with the day-to-day medicine and how it's being carried out. And hopefully in each of you, there's some sort of a spark of what you want to do differently and how you would take healthcare in a different direction. Um, I don't think healthcare is working. I think it's going to take physicians for the most part to bring it to the level that it needs to operate at. And so just a little bit of a personal opinion, which is I do believe that that there has been an over corporatization of medicine, and that's why I think it's time to kind of take medicine back. And therefore I really want to promote this sort of way of thinking and being, and support it in any way, which way I can. Just keep in mind, today's presentation is not it's just a general educational seminar. It is not legal advice. It's only intended to be informational stuff. This video is being recorded, and we are on an open and live platform. So if you have a sensitive question that you cannot say, that's going to be recorded. Please ask after the fact. Keep in mind, I have no financial relationship to anything that you would be giving to any of your patients that I would be pitching today. So for those of you that are physicians, I don't think it really it affects you in any way. So I started thinking about it. Like, what are your motivations for being here today? What made you want to sign up for this seminar? Anyone want to share? Was it was it your physician rights? If it was your physician rights, just click a one into the chat box. If it was physician rights, that's what caused you to come here, meaning you felt somewhere along the way that your physician rights were being trampled on, and that you needed more freedom, that there was too much pressure being placed upon physicians to act more like robots than have their freedom and the art of doing what they needed to do. That's really important. The other thing is, um, uh, there's also compensation, right? A lot of physicians are being, I think, in a way, shorted the compensation that they used to get back in the 80s and even 90s. But in the last 20 years, it's kind of dwindled away. So really, today, I'm really looking for the emergence of the physicianpreneur, the physicianpreneur in you, and hopefully I can help you support that. Hopefully I can help you make introductions to all of the other people that you will need on that bus in your journey to being a physicianpreneur. So our presentation is really 50 minutes long. Today we'll start off with how the ideas get started, whether you're thinking about having a single site or a multi-office sort of a practice. Who is going to be on this journey with you, and who's going to be regulating you while you're on this journey, while you're practicing on your own. What sorts of stark laws and marketing issues can you have come up that you need to be wary of? And we'll talk through that in some detail, and then we'll talk about the forms and things you'll need, which is also something that I can actually help you with. So, dream of owning a practice and learn how to run and grow a business while helping patients. Yeah, that is the ultimate dream of a physician. Physicians do dream of that. That they want to actually help learn, grow a business, make good money at it at the same time. But really, ultimately, they didn't get into it just for the money. They just didn't want to get trampled on. And in this day and age where we are, physicians are just getting trampled on by the powers that be. And it's the whole corporatization of healthcare. So let's talk about the birth of an idea, right? So right now, you are probably at a point of where you've got an idea in mind. And with that, you're probably seeing some sort of a gap in the supply and the demand of what that niche is. Whether you are looking at maybe like I get a ton of phone calls on IV therapy. Frankly, I think there's probably too many people going into that space, but nonetheless, it's there. A lot, I do get calls on concierge medicine, mental health issues, healthcare tourism. I don't get any phone calls on, but that's another interesting idea, right? How to provide patients access. These are all just interesting ideas that you can work with, or you may have your very own, very traditional idea. It doesn't have to be anything new. Some of you may have heard of RPM, which is remote patient monitoring, which is a whole software side, software and even some hardware into healthcare. And I've known physicians that have developed that over the years and done very well at it. So, there are ideas everywhere, but what you've got to do is you've got to find your gap. Once you find the gap of what you're trying to fill, what the market needs, what you're going to end up needing to do is really figuring out who's on your team, what kinds of regulations apply, and what kinds of legal forms do you need to have in place. That's where these are the parts that I can cover. There's other areas that I will not touch on because I'm not an expert in it. I only know the areas that I know, but I will give you my insights from the earnest perspective that I possibly can. So, what is your idea? Are you just thinking about developing perhaps a private medical practice? If you have like a private medical practice, it could be a general practice, it could be a specialized practice, or it could be a super specialized practice. And what I mean by that is, when you're a physician, you can obviously go and practice, I don't know, let's say you practice in cardiology. And if you practice in cardiology, you could maybe become an interventional cardiologist, which obviously requires more training, and you could go do that. And then what you could do is you could even super niche it, right? Super niche it into maybe perhaps being an interventional cardiologist for the disabled, for perhaps people that are incapacitated, that can't think, that can't move. Uh, that requires a different level of care than a normal sort of a patient would. Same thing goes for dental, right? Dental practices, the same thing. You could have a general practice or you could have a specialized practice. And within that specialized practice, again, you could go into a very specialized sort of a patient base. So, we're not going to touch so much on medical laboratories, pharmacies, or any of these, or like optometry, but we are going to touch on medicine in general. If you have questions specifically about that, I do apologize that I won't be covering them today, but if you can ask them, and perhaps I'll know the answer, or somebody else that's on with us will know the answer. But keep in mind, the corporate practice of medicine is here to stay. So how are you going to capitalize on it? That's really where you're at. So how did corporate practice of medicine get to the point that it has gotten to? It's because physicians have been out lawyered by the business guys. It's as simple as that. The physicians have been out lawyered by the business guys. If it wasn't for lawyers, you wouldn't need lawyers. Okay, so I say that in a jesting sort of way, but there's a lot of truth in that, because if you actually think about it, physicians are highly allergic to lawyers, and I get why they are, but really that fear of them running away from lawyers is really what has also helped weaken them, because they do not protect themselves like business people protect themselves. Um, so now, with your idea in mind, are you going to go at it alone, or are you going to have a partner? Right? There's that old African proverb, and I'm sure you've heard this before. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And each of those approaches are very different approaches. Neither is wrong and neither is right, but they're very different approaches. And as we talk through some of the stuff that we're going to be going through today, I want you to think about that. Do you want to go at it alone? There's advantages to going at it alone. You're going to get to make decisions. You're going to get to move faster. You're going to have a lot less checking to do, but you're also not going to have perhaps the hand holding or the safety net or another person to share the experience with. So you've got to balance that out. And there's benefits to both and there's drawbacks to both. So, just one last bit of just telling you as to who you can pick as your partner. Remember, birds of a feather flock together, and I think what they really mean by that is that people of the same interests, same thoughts, same styles, same morals, values, tastes. They can be found together. Okay, in that way, when you look at lawyers, lawyers cannot be partners with non-lawyers. Dentists cannot be partners with non-dentists. Even optometrists cannot be partners with non-optometrists. And same thing goes for chiropractors. But medical doctors, meaning MDs and DOs, can be partners with non-doctors. So that makes for a really, really strange mix of values that are somewhat clashing with each other. As much as you can, you're going to have to work on ironing that out. If you decide to start your own practice, you're going to have to iron that out up front. And hopefully that's where I think that some of the agreements and contracts we'll talk about today will help you do that. They'll help you kind of figure that out. So, like I was saying, corporate practice of medicine is here to stay. It is really now the emergence of the physicianpreneur that's about to happen. And physicians are going to go more and more independent. Number one, technology has become cheaper. They can have a lot of technology. Hiring people on a remote sort of a basis has gotten a lot cheaper and easier. So there are a lot of eases in healthcare that have happened that were not there even just a few years ago. So healthcare is opening up to the small solo practitioners. Um, and I think that there's a lot of positives to it. So the first thing you'll want to consider is if and excuse me if I talk more about the corporate sort of stuff like versus the individual. The individual stuff is easy to figure out, but if I talk about the corporate stuff, you'll know exactly what the answer is if you decide to do it solo. But if you decide to bring on a partner, remember, partnership is not just a partnership. It's actually a marriage with a contract. And what I mean by that is it's actually a business relationship, but you have to be able to put up with the good and the bad of the other individual that's your partner to a certain degree, you know. So some of the things you're going to want to consider is, are you going to have shared responsibilities, or is only one person going to have the responsibility? Are you going to want to be able to swap out the responsibility with each other? Who's going to have the decision making capability on what issues? How is liability to the practice going to be handled? What if the practice needs a guarantor? What if it needs more funds? What if there is a bad financial month that the practice has? Who's going to pay for those bills? So there's a whole side to it. So you got to think about that. And if you put together a good partnership agreement, it will have already thought through it. One of the things that I learned as a young CPA and as working in like financial situations was I always start off with the exit strategy in mind. First of all, you got to have the purpose in mind, but the next thing that follows is the exit. How do you get out of a relationship that you just got into? Because if you can contour the right exit strategy, you can fix the relationship even if it goes bad. You can actually realign it, you can adjust it, you can make changes to it. But if you don't have a good exit clause in a partnership contract, you will not be able to realign it. It's going to either go down or blow up, or you're going to be begrudgingly in it with pain, with lots of pain. So, the way I work with my folks is I help them figure out, under what conditions will they buy another practice? Under what conditions will they sell a practice? Under what conditions will they take out a loan? What if there's a lease? How are they going to actually negotiate the lease? And who's going to pay for the lease? And who's going to guarantee the lease? So we go through all of these sorts of thinking process, and it's like a brainstorming exercise. But again, these are the legal considerations. You have to consider what everybody else in the practice is also doing, because you don't just need a lawyer. You actually need like a team of people. You don't need necessarily partners, but you need a team, like a brain bank that you can count on. Like what Charles was saying. Next month he's got Coleman Consulting coming on. Now that would be one of your brain trusts that you would want to rely on to be able to talk to and see if they can help you with your practice. So who are your players? All right. So this is where the whole brain trust part of it comes in. You need somebody that has actually seen a business model run before, the one that you're thinking about, or something very close to that business. So you can actually listen to their advice, know what kinds of things went right, what kinds of things went wrong, what you're going to tweak. You're going to need like a revenue cycle strategist. You're going to need a credentialing strategist. You're going to need people like that. It's just a given. And you got to find them. They're not expensive. They're very reachable and achievable and findable, but you got to get them on board. You got to have like a short list of these individuals. The other thing I would also suggest to you is you got to know, as much as we all hate salespeople, and I'm no different than the doctors, but I do know that some of the things that I have learned in my life and I use in my practice have come from salespeople that are highly, highly important to me. So when I go to a conference, I always pay attention to the vendors that are there. What are they doing and what are they doing differently today than they were last year? I want to understand that so I can implement that in my practice. Just like I probably am able to achieve certain things for my clients at much more efficient ways than other places do because I pay attention to what kinds of technologies are available to me. So in the same way, you're also going to want to have identified a business operations manager that's going to help you. You're going to need a insurance agent. You're going to need a banker. You're going to need a tax accountant, and you're going to need a healthcare business attorney. And I don't just mean a healthcare attorney. You're going to need a healthcare business attorney because what business does a political science person have giving you advice about your business when they actually have no background in business. If they don't know what the difference is between accounts receivable, delinquent accounts receivable, net receivables, net realizable revenues, gross margins, net profit margins. I mean, those are just basic business terms that they've got to really understand. And I will tell you that I don't think that most folks, even at times bankers, will surprise you that they don't know it themselves. So you've got to really tap into the right people, the right source, and you got to develop your own brain bank. And if you've got a highly specialized practice, you may want to think about bringing on or talking to other people that'll help you achieve your goal. Not all of these things cost money either. You can actually tap into these folks. The first top four that I mentioned in here that are in green, there's an overlap between those. You may be able to find one or two of those in one person. So you got to look for people that are like this. And like Charles, to me, is frankly been my lifesaver for finding the right person in his Rolodex. And now it's going to take you time to find these people. You don't need all of them on the day you start, but try to get them as soon as you can because you're going to need them pretty soon after you do start. So you gotta bring on the players. Now that you've thought it through as to what you need and your ideas and what you're thinking about doing, and let's say you've vetted it through your consultants or your colleagues and your mentors, you know, let's talk a little bit about how you're going to set up your business. Okay. So I want you to really pay attention to some of these things that I've said, only because I find them to be extremely important. And I don't think enough physicians think through them. So, whether it's the partnership situation that we talked about, how are you going to negotiate your partnership contract? Or maybe you're going to do it solo. So think through that too. You might want to just do this thing solo. Um, so anyway, corporate setups. How are you going to do your corporate setup? How are you going to limit your risk? Most companies, and this includes larger size healthcare systems, are not just one company. Like whether you look at Broward Health is not just one company. Whether you look at Advent Health, it's not just one company. They have multiple different divisions and they divide up the assets and the liabilities and the purposes and the functions and the high risk and the low risk between these subsidiaries and divisions, and they break them apart. The reason why they do that is because it actually minimizes risk, and sometimes it even helps increase efficiency if you separate and divisionalize some of these things. So, my question to you is, do you have big plans to develop your own practice? Or are you thinking about only doing one office or multiple practices? If you're going to do multiple practices, you got to stick through this whole presentation because we're about to go there. And if you're only thinking about opening up one shop, doing it solo yourself, that's great too. That works for you, and I think you're going to pick up more stuff as we go through this process. So let's talk a little bit about corporate practice of medicine and how it's really set up, because we're going to break this model here, like this holding company model, and we're going to break this down a little bit further. In this particular situation, keep it in mind that there is one subsidiary that's the active business. There's another subsidiary that actually holds the intellectual property. So, like for example, your trademark, your copyrights, you might want to put them under a separate company because you want to be able to license them out to other organizations, to other locations. So, like if you decide to open up something in Fort Lauderdale, and now you might decide to open up something also up in Port St. Lucie. And if you do that, is it going to fly with the same flag over it? Is it going to have the same, like, let's say, I'm going to call it the Coca-Cola sign. Is it going to be Coca-Cola medicine? Like, are you going to use the same signage there as well so it becomes more and more recognized? And you may want to talk to a market strategist about that as well, because we also know that the more of the sign that's repeated in the same locale and same area, the more business it drives for everyone, for all of those locations. If the locations are too far apart, it doesn't drive as much business. So for those who practice in this area, they know that. So what you do is you really try to develop a geography that's yours. Anyway, I'll leave that one alone for now. But this is this is literally a book in and of itself to talk about. Now, let's talk about the corporate practice of medicine. How is it really set up? You know, um, the larger practices are set up in many different ways. Okay, and this is probably a very simplified model of how the larger practices are set up. What you basically have is the main medical corporation. So, like, I don't know, let's give it company ABC, right? Company ABC is the actual brand name. Now, to that company ABC, there's also a medical group. So there's like the friendly doctors that are the medical group that provides services to that. And what you have is below it is you have the physician working on the patient. As the physician works on the patient pays into the business. The insurance reimburses for that patient services, and that goes into the business. And the doctors also get to bill out directly to the insurance as well as to the patients. So there's money flowing back and forth, but there's at least one, two, and probably three corporations that are set up in larger enterprises. So, what does a MSO typically do? Well, what they really do is they manage the back office stuff, the non-clinical support. They put together the turnkey operations of setting up an office. They even provide lending to the actual medical corporation that's providing all of these services. They'll do payroll, billing, accounting. So here in this box right here, I list out the kinds of stuff that's typically done. And what do the medical providers do? Well, they take care of the patients, which is obviously the evaluation, the diagnosis, and the actual treatment of what the patients do. And they also drive the clinical protocol that's to be followed. Any questions so far as to how a MSO is set up? So what ends up happening is that somewhere out here, there is another group. All of these could have their own board of directors, okay? But there's also another group outside of that that is indirectly controlling a lot of these things that are happening. So when people say, "Oh, this entity is a not-for-profit," I'm like, "That's great because that's great for tax, minimizing purposes." However, the actual real beneficiary of this whole setup is going to be either this group over here, the MSO, or the actual doctors. So somewhere in there, that's what's going to happen. Now, the more business guys you get involved, the more the MSO benefits, and the less the medical doctors get. But the business guys can't do without the medical doctors, so they need them as well. And this is kind of how the setup is done in a MSO. There's multiple different variations of this, but I try to give you a simplified form of it so you can see how it works. So now that we've talked about how a corporate practice of medicine is set up, what are you going to do? What sort of company are you going to start? Let's talk a little bit about that, because whatever company you set up, it's got to help you insulate your assets and liabilities through your corporations and away from you personally. So for the most part, there's a whole huge dispute whether you should use a Inc. or a corporation or a LLC or a PLC or a general partnership or a L or a limited liability partnership. I think it's much talk about nothing unless you get into the fine nitty gritties of stuff that's more academic. My straight and narrow of it is, you know what? Use an LLC for your operations. Use a PLLC for your medical doctor, dentist corporation. Uh, you know, uh, so really, you're using an LLC or a PLLC. And how do you create one? If you haven't already created one, all you do is you go to sunbiz.org, and I've highlighted this down here. Go and register your entity. You go online, you say start a company, and you just start the business. You start entering in the information on it, and you know what? Fill it out. Pay your $125, I think it is, to actually register, and submit it. If something doesn't come out right, call me, tell me, and I'll fix it for you. But I don't think you'll go wrong with it. Rarely people do. It doesn't ask you that many questions. Now, if you have a partnership, there is a little bit more consideration to be had there, and you got to think through those sorts of things. Any questions so far, guys? Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about when you do create a company, what are the things you're really looking at? Because I don't think people understand the layers of thinking that starting a company has in it. If it's, I'm not talking about the sole individual owner sort of companies. I'm talking about companies that have more than one shareholder. If it's two shareholders or 10 shareholders, you got to think through all of this sort of stuff. So first of all, where are you going to incorporate? So like on item number one, what state and jurisdiction are you going to incorporate? My personal suggestion to 99% to all of my clients, number one is incorporate here where you are, which is Florida. If they say no, 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 I really want to incorporate in Delaware, or Nevada or Alaska or some other place, I ask them why. And usually the answer is anonymity. They want to maintain their anonymity. They don't want anyone to know that they own a particular corporation. And that's really the reason why they go abroad. But what I can also tell you is majority of the time, anonymity is not all that important because you're giving away a lot of public disclosure as soon as you go and register with the Agency for Healthcare, for the Agency for Healthcare Administration. So the first thing you have is the articles of incorporation that you will file in a particular jurisdiction. Now, think about it. I'd prefer that you do it on your own, but if you don't have the bandwidth to do it on your own, have your accountant do it or have me do it, and my staff will be happy to do it. the other thing you're going to need with your entity, especially if you've got a partner, is an operating agreement. For LLCs, it's called an operating agreement. For companies and incorporation, they're called bylaws. So like shareholder bylaws or operating agreement or member operating agreement. So yeah, that is not so simple when you have more than one shareholder. If it's a husband and wife situation, maybe that's a little bit different. That could be simpler. But if there's any level of difference between the husband and wife, you may want to think through it again as to who's going to control what component of this. Now, you could have a single class of stock, so you don't really differentiate between class A, B, C, D, E, F. But you can actually create a company with multiple classes of stock. And a lot of people won't tell you much about this, but if you're an accountant, you kind of figure out, hey, like what works for you. There are different classes of stock you can actually create, and it doesn't matter what you call them. In here, for example, I have class A, B, C, D, E, F. So here, what I did is I designated class A is really just a normal voting stock, a regular day-to-day sort of an average voting stock. A class B would be like a a non-voting share, where what it would do is it would actually create kind of like the equity value in the company, but they would have no decision or say so on that stock or in that company. They would only get to share in the profits and the sale of it. Conversely, you could also maybe create like a E class stock, which might be like the employee incentive stock. And that's often non-voting and it has no equity value in it. It just lets people know what kind of profit they can expect to get at the end of the year as long as they are there with the company. That's all that means. Now, some companies even use what would be called founder stock. And, I usually label that F, class F stock. And that has in its special provisions, special overriding provisions, especially if the founders want to retain control of that entity. So in a corporation, you can have multiple classes of stock. You can define them, you can custom tailor them to the kinds of people that are going to be holding those shares. So that does several things. Number one, it allows you more freedom. It allows you to specify what someone has a right to do or not to do if they own a share of your company. This is hugely important to most entrepreneurs to control this in the right way. If you don't control this the right way, I guarantee it, this will be problematic later on down the line. The other thing to consider when you are putting together a corporation is what happens to contributions. What if somebody puts in an investment? Does that investment go in as an investment or does it go in as a loan? What if after 6 months or a year, the company needs more money because it's been losing money for the first 6 months of startup? Well, you're going to need additional capital. How are you going to come up with it? Are you going to go out and borrow money? Chances are, if you're losing money, you're not going to be able to borrow money. So that means that you're going to have to look to the partners to lend the money to the corporation. The other thing you may want to consider is sweat equity. There are partners that certain corporations take on that don't contribute any money, but they contribute a whole hell a lot of their own muscle, sweat, and tears and brains, and they forego other levels of income when they're doing that. Um, um, so so when they're so this sweat equity is not something to be taken lightly because that will rear its head later on down the road. If you've got two partners, one contributes money and a little bit of time, while the other one contributes money too, but contributes a whole hell of a lot of time, you're going to want to know, hey, like, is that person getting compensated or not? Otherwise, it's a recipe for animosity. Last but not least, like what I told you earlier on, one of the key provisions that I look for being a CPA, an accountant, and then a financial person in my prior life, I look for how are people going to exit and enter into this business. And you've got to have that worked out ahead of time. If you don't have it worked out ahead of time, again, it is a recipe for disaster. I have seen partnerships fall apart because of it. I've seen partnerships take each other, partners take each other down, uh, fight with each other till the ends of the earth, and it's not a very good scenario. So what I try to do is, while everybody is happy and in the honeymoon phase, I try to make sure that the exit strategy is ironed out in a really nice way, as as clearly, as solidly as it can be, so you can so if someone has to leave, they can leave. You know, God forbid somebody's family member gets sick and now they actually have to leave the company. It's not even, let's say, to leave for greener pastures. It's just because life kind of takes them in that direction. Well, you have to be ready for that in a partnership setting. Now, on the bottom, you'll see it says corporate veil. Corporate veil is a very important concept in law. When you have a corporation, it's considered to be veiled as a whole other entity. So, like, for example, if I own a corporation and the corporation happens to do something bad, I cannot be personally held responsible for it just because it did something bad. Let's say it defaults on the money it owes. Well, they can't come after me. The only way they could come after me is if they actually have a personal guarantee from me. So, in order to maintain that corporate veil and the identity of the corporation, you have to make sure that you do not commingle funds, that you keep separate bank accounts, that you don't use your company as your private piggy bank, that you actually treat it like a proper corporation. And I'm sure your accountant will walk you through it as to what to do, but it's a highly, highly, highly important thing to keep in mind. Uh, if you have multiple companies, like what we were talking about just a minute ago in the corporate practice of medicine, like here, what you want to do is in each of these dotted lines, you want to have intracompany contracts, so they all define what is what the function of the other is. So just make sure that those companies are also not intermingling with each other either. And that's how you look at that's how you use corporations to minimize risks. Now, let's take a quick look at risks and what kinds of risks you could be facing. And I'm not going to beat this to death, but I do want you to be aware of the fact that you do have operational risk. And the obvious one is malpractice, right? The professional liability issues. Keep in mind, malpractice, professional liability means the same thing. As far as what you're concerned about, it's the same. Two different words means the same thing. When you call up an insurance agent and try to get a quote, they will know that. But if they say one thing or the other, you don't have to ask them. Like, is malpractice the same thing as professional liability? They'll probably refer to it as professional liability, but I think in most people call it malpractice, like in our world, right? Like normal. You will also, over time, you will pick up employees. You're going to need workers' comp. You're going to make sure that you have vetted them properly, that you have them on the proper shifts and schedules, so that you're paying them for the time that they're working. That you've done their background checks, whether it's a level 1, level 2, the different levels of background checks that you have to do. So you have human capital risk. The other risk that you also have is a strategic risk. You may enter into some sort of a reimbursement contracts that may work against you, or they may work for you. So the reimbursement risks have to be assessed a little differently. You got to bring in the specialists that understand reimbursements. That's not going to be a lawyer. That's going to be probably somebody like the Coleman people that Charles was talking about that are doing the presentation next month. The other thing that you're going to have is you're going to want to keep an eye out on the competition, what the competition is doing. Before I started in my law practice, I went out and I looked at what the competition was doing. Not only in the state of Florida, but I looked in the state of California, I looked in the state of New York, I looked in the state of Colorado and Texas. I looked at what other healthcare attorneys were doing just to solidify the business model that I was going to run. And in the same way, you're going to want to do the same thing. You're going to want to figure out what is the business model that other people are running. Otherwise, you're going to run a risk of competition, and you're not going to know how to adjust to it as soon as you see it pop up. Now, there's also legal and regulatory risks, and we'll talk about that and the Stark laws in just a little bit, and we'll touch on only the key components of it. I won't kill you with a whole couple of hours worth of anti kickback statutes and Stark law stuff, but that's there. Now, technological risks. In the more recent days, you may have seen that there's been hackings going on. There's been like leaked data. There's been people taken out of money taken out of people's bank accounts. That's one form of technological risk. Another one is the kinds of machines that you're using. If you're using machines in your business, it's a technological risk. Now, with that, you also have machines that may not have been calibrated properly that you may be using in your practice. What if you get a bad reading because the machine wasn't calibrated properly? It's a technology risk, and you've got to keep that in mind. Like, hey, is it like for example, MRI machines, right? So the places that do the MRI scans, their risk is very different, right? So you got to think about that sort of stuff. The other thing to keep in mind is you're also going to be a part of danger to any sort of storms, fires, or anything else that occurs in your market space. So these are the typical kinds of risks you'll see in your business. So now, how do you hedge against them? Well, the obvious answer is you look for insurance. You insurance your way out of it. But everything has a cost benefit analysis to it, right? So you got to sit down, you got to do the cost versus what the benefit is and what the likelihood of occurrence is. So professional liability, I always I suggest to my physicians to carry professional liability insurance because when they need it, there's nothing like it. But a lot of physicians go without it, and there's a good reason for that as well, because if you carry professional liability insurance, you have a higher chance, or at least what I've heard from all of the insurance guys, is that you have a higher chance of being sued. Okay. However, the other side of it is, if you do get sued, regardless, there's nothing like having professional liability insurance to help you pay for the expenses. And if something, God forbid, something did go wrong, they'll actually help you pay for the mistake that you did make. So not only is it going to be the cost of helping you pay for the mistake, but also the cost of defending you. And those can be very expensive. Now, there's some plans out there that are called prepaid legal plans. I'm not so sure what benefit you get if you've already prepaid somebody for a service, and they have nothing on the backside. So to me, it kind of defies some level of common sense, but maybe there's something about it I don't understand. But that's my flat out honest opinion about it. The other thing to keep in mind is whatever place you do open up, your landlord is probably going to ask you for a premises liability or a general liability policy, and maybe even like a property damage policy. So on this sheet, on this page 17, what you're seeing is the different kinds of insurances you could be asked to carry. And don't be surprised, because you're going to need to talk to an insurance agent. Again, this is going to be one of the people that's going to be your go-to call numbers, that you're going to call up your insurance agent and say, hey, look, today I need this. Or tomorrow, let's say you're in this building, you have a huge place, and you just replace your air conditioner for 50 or $100,000. Some of these commercial air conditioners can be pretty expensive. Are you going to get that air conditioner insured? What if there's a lightning strike? What if somebody comes in and starts to steal the parts of that air conditioner? What if that air conditioner is on the floor level versus the top of the roof? On the floor level, on the ground level, it's easier to break into. If it's on the roof, it's more susceptible to things like, lightning strikes. Yeah. So if you anyway, if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them for you. But now let's so insurance is actually a very common way to mitigate risk. It's well worth looking at, well worth inquiring about, and figuring out what to do about it. Next, let's talk a little bit about the regulatory bodies and who regulates your profession. This is this is going to be probably one of the more critical slides you'll see. What you see here is the Agency for Healthcare Administration. The Agency for Healthcare Administration is key to you opening up any office that you plan to open up. The website that you see down below where it says application for licensure, the HTTPS with the application for licensure, that is the main website you go to start your registration. Now, up here on the left-hand side, also in yellow, you see is the number you can call to get some advice as to which way to go. So if you go to the Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration, this number and this website is going to be important. What I will do at the end of this, I will email you this whole entire slide so you have it in your basket, and you can use it later on down the road. Now, not only this, there's a second regulatory body that I want you to pay attention to. I want you to pay attention to the Florida Department of Health and your Board of Medicine, whether it's a Board of Medicine, osteopathic medicine, or whether it's a Board of Nursing, whatever it is, pay it, or the Board of Pharmacy for that matter. Pay attention to that board that applies to the licenses that your business has. Call them up, tell them what you're doing, get their input, ask them what you're about to do. Is this okay? Talk to your credentialing person, talk to your the short list of consultants I talked about. Call those people up and ask them, am I doing the right thing? It's your credentialing person, your revenue cycle management person that's going to really help you figure out like you're on the right track. There are literally consultants, that's all they do is help you get registered with these agencies. You typically don't use lawyers for that, but if you need a lawyer, I'm happy to help you. All I can tell you is I would have to go look at it and review it and blah, blah, blah. But there are people that specialize in this that are not lawyers and that will charge you literally like a low amount of fees, and you'll be able to get right through it. Okay. Now, with that said, let's talk a little bit about the rules and laws, because I do need to start wrapping things up. This is the hierarchy of corporate governance of what you're looking at. First thing you want to know is what are the governmental statutes that regulate what you're about to do. Next thing you want to know is what are the governmental rules and policies. By that, what I mean is the Florida Administrative Code. The third thing you're going to want to know is this is a hierarchy here, right? So if you're looking at the hierarchy, you got to follow this. What trumps what? You're going to be looking at other regulating bodies like the Joint Commission, the NCQA, the quality measures that are required in your industry, your medical professional boards. Then after that, you'll fall towards your corporate operating documents and policies and procedures. But this is your hierarchy of how you will be governed. Now, let's start off with the governmental statutes. Where do you go to for that? Here on this page. On this slide, you can see these are the different statutes that the Florida legislature has set up for the different professions. I've highlighted the ones that are for the medical practice, the osteopathic medicine folks, dentistry, pharmacy, but there's even really interesting other statutes that I would not have expected to see there. For example, midwifery. There's a statute on midwifery. There is a statute on health testing services, an actual chapter dedicated to it. Yeah, here's chapter 464, which is on nursing. There are even chapters on public health, maternal and infants, and how those need to be taken care of. So this is a really important slide for you guys. You need to get familiar with whatever area you're going to be practicing in. Read it. If you have any questions about it, call me and we'll read it together and we'll interpret it together. But this is what you got to look at. The other thing is you need to know your Florida Administrative Code. So the FAC, the 64B8 and 64B15, those are the ones that regulate doctors and PAs, meaning physician assistants. Now, there's other administrative codes like for dentistry and nursing, but know that they're there. If you Google it, you'll find it. If you go to my website, you'll also find it. So these are the key things you need to keep in mind. Next thing, what things can put you in practice can put your practice in trouble? There is a dark side to this, and be aware of the dark side. Remember, you cannot pay for patient referrals. You cannot pay insurance brokers. You cannot pay diagnostic businesses, and diagnostic businesses cannot be paying you for stuff. You cannot strike sweetheart deals for certain doctors and companies to be referring you stuff just because you're exchanging something. It's problematic. Having an exaggerator or a false diagnosis is obviously a big no-no. Billing for unlicensed personnel as if they were licensed, but there was no supervision over them. Wow, that's problematic. Keep these things in mind. This is the kind of stuff that can get you into hot water, but usually not in the beginning. This takes a few years to build up, and you'll have to get good at it and make sure you recognize it. Now let's talk a little bit about the web presence and what you can do to preserve your reputation. Remember, there are these websites you can go to and go and register your business. There is like vitals.com, there's healthgrades.com, there's ZocDoc, Google, Yelp, etc., etc., etc. You're going to get good reviews and you're going to get some bad reviews. So learn how to deal with your bad reviews. Now, I look at my reviews regularly. Thank God I don't have any real bad reviews, but every now and then I do know that there are clients that aren't all that happy. And frankly, I would rather have them say what they're thinking and put it out there, because if it's legitimately happening, I do want them to be out there. But sometimes, patients as well as clients do walk in with a unrealistic level of expectation. Now, keep in mind, if you do get a negative review, the best way to handle it is with empathy, address the situation, but do not disclose anything private about that patient right on the web. That's obviously highly improper and a HIPAA violation. So don't do it. Here's a sample message on this that I've used in the past, written it up with another professional, so you can use something like this as a response if you do get a negative review, but this is how you do it. All right. Well, I think we just covered this in the last slide, and so I'm going to move it along. Protect your intellectual property. You may want to trademark. You may want to copyright the stuff that you have, and you might want to enter into some territorial restriction agreements with your employees. You don't want them going out and competing against you. Now, what legal forms and agreements do you need? Now, I'm only talking about the legal forms and agreements you need. There's going to be other stuff you're going to need. But obviously, you're going to need a patient intake form. If you need that, call me. I do have a library of where I've got this sort of stuff set up. We can customize something for your needs. But there's also what's called a patient consent to treatment form. So if you're doing any sort of a procedure or giving the patient something, you need to get that patient consent to treatment form in place. Patient agreement. This patient agreement is highly, highly, highly important. Depending on the kind of work that you're doing, especially if you go into a cash-only business, you got to make sure that your patient agreement is so nice, so simple, easy to read, but yet enforceable. How do you get a nice balance of that? Well, you got to be smart enough. You got to think like a business person, and you got to think like a lawyer at the same time to put together the right patient agreement that really gives you the best of both worlds. That has clarity. It's simple, straightforward, lays out the money the way it needs to be laid out, and right into that agreement, and is enforceable. So, because patients will get inundated with too much paperwork coming at them. Also, keep in mind there's what's called a media release authorization. As you grow your own business, you might want to use some photographs of some sort of a situation on your website, maybe in a blog, maybe in a book that you're writing. Even if you're using it in a book, you're going to need a media release authorization. So, obviously don't take a picture of the person's face. Try to keep it as anonymous as possible, but you do want to document that particular procedure, that particular situation. So there's also what's called a media release authorization. If you need that, tell me and we can get one for you. The other thing is for your website package, you're going to want to make sure that your website is protected, that your privacy policy is clearly stated on there, and the terms and conditions of using your website are also on there. Meaning, for example, your blog is not medical advice; it's just a blog regarding information, right? So you got to make sure that your website has the right disclaimers and the terms and conditions that are on it. The other thing to keep in mind is you're going to need a medical director agreement if you are a business person, or if you have a different location, you're going to need a medical director agreement for that particular location. We do medical director agreements. We can help you with that. Lease agreements are obviously not a problem. We do lease reviews for really cheap, for like $1,500. We do a lease review. It doesn't get much cheaper than that, but we do a medical office building lease review. We don't negotiate it. That doesn't include negotiating, but you want to make sure that you're not getting into this lease that ties you into a 10-year lease, but you come to find out that after year one, your business has failed. Now, who's going to be responsible for the next 9 years of guaranteeing, right? That's the kind of stuff that I'm afraid for my clients, because I see which way the financials go. The first year, the financials are very slow. The second year, the financials are still slow. The third year is kind of when they start. So you got to be ready for the long haul, but you got to make sure that your agreements also fall in line with your risks. And I think that's where it's really important to have that. We also do like staff independent contractor agreements, the non-compete addendums, if you're concerned about somebody taking off with your stuff. And last but not least, if you go to our website, you can always download a sample patient termination discharge letter. It's a sample letter. If you have problematic patients, just get rid of them. Do not keep them on your roll. Take them off, terminate them, get rid of them, because they will be problematic for you. They will stop you from growing your business. They even mean potential liability to you. So if you need any of these forms, we can help you with those. If there's other forms that you're looking for, call us. Maybe we have them, and we just didn't happen to list it here. If not, I have plenty of friends in the business that do different areas that I'll be happy to introduce you to, and maybe they can help you. So with that said, if you need anything, just email me, call me, text me. Here is my personal cell phone number. This is the same cell phone number that my wife uses. You're welcome to text me there, or just call my office number. My office number, well, I don't have it on here, but I do have it. If you just go to my website, it's there. And if you need something with like a specific sort of, if you have a quick question, just call me. I'm happy to answer it. I'd rather spend 5 minutes talking to you and helping you navigate through something than you going through a pitfall. And then I come to find out later on that I could have helped you with a 5-minute conversation. So
Ben, let
with
me
that,
let me let me ask you
what's
one
that?
question before you kind of wrap up.
Yes, yes.
I have one
Sure.
other question. We just discovered a lot of different things. What about dealing with the insurance companies who basically are your lifeblood of your business?
Oh man, it's very manageable. You just got to put time into it, right? So from what I've seen is the people who are not able to manage their insurance reimbursements properly are the ones that are not paying attention to it. So what I do is I help them clean that up. And they'll oftentimes will send me their contracts. They'll say, "Hey Ben, these guys haven't paid me, 100,000 or $200,000. Can you go collect it?" Yeah, I do that. I do that sort of stuff as well. But you got to manage those contracts, and there is no such thing, guys, if I can stress one thing, there is no such thing as a boilerplate contract. Not all contracts are the same. They are all very different. They're all very different and negotiable to very different points, also depending on the kinds of parties you have. So keep that in mind. No two contracts are the same.
All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording now. If anybody has any questions, they don't want to record it or thing. But I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I'm just going to stop the recording. But if you have any
And we're going to
questions,
stay on so
continue
you
on.
can ask your questions after the
Right,
fact.
right, sure. Okay. Thank you again for joining us.